Hi everyone, my name is Brian Clough and this is my presentation, No Place to Call Home, Ireland's Struggle for Affordable Housing in a Privatized Market. In this presentation, I'll explore the causes and impacts of the housing crisis in Ireland, focusing on how privatization has contributed to the issue. We'll also consider potential solutions, including international examples to address this urgent problem. Ireland is currently facing a critical housing crisis. As of 2024, over 14,000 individuals experience homelessness daily, as reported by the BBC News. Housing has transitioned from a basic human need to a commodity prioritized for profit. The focus of this presentation is to examine how market-driven policies in Ireland have created barriers to housing access, and why we need to redefine housing as a human right to address these issues effectively. Let's take a closer look at the numbers behind this crisis. Over the past decade, rents in Dublin have increased by more than 70%, while median wages have only risen by 20%, according to Focus Ireland and Gibbons and McMahon. Currently, the average rent in Dublin exceeds €2,000 per month, consuming over 50% of the average household's income. These statistics illustrate the unsustainable gap between income and housing costs, pushing more people into homelessness. Privatization has played a significant role in this crisis. Initially, it was intended to improve housing efficiency. It has instead shifted housing from a necessity to an investment. Norris and Hayden explain that real estate developers prioritize profits, which often means catering to high-income markets. This leads to lower-income populations without affordable options, worsening inequality and instability. Now let's dig deeper into privatization. While it was introduced to increase efficiency and housing availability, market dynamics have turned housing into a financial asset rather than a social good. Real estate investors focus on high returns, sidelining the needs of lower income groups. This shift has deepened housing inequality, making it clear that market-driven solutions alone cannot resolve this crisis. Economic precarity further complicates the housing crisis. Rising rents and stagnant wages have made housing increasingly unaffordable for working-class families. For example, households are now spending over half of their income on rent, leaving little room for other necessities. This financial strain perpetuates cycles of poverty and makes it nearly impossible for many families to secure stable housing. The social impacts of housing insecurity are profound. The Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission notes that unstable housing increases mental and physical health risks, disrupts family stability, and perpetuates poverty. Vulnerable groups, such as single mothers and immigrants, are disproportionately affected. Single-parent households represent 23% of those experiencing housing instability, and over 40% of immigrant households are classified as at risk for homelessness. This really underscores the systemic inequalities in housing access. The Irish government has implemented several initiatives to address housing insecurity, including the Housing for All plan. While these programs aim to increase housing supply, they are often criticized for over-relying on private investment and failing to address systemic issues. For example, Reynolds and Kearns argue that these initiatives provide only temporary relief and lack the structural reforms needed to create long-term solutions. There is some pretty significant debate about whether housing should be treated as a human right. Critics argue that government-mandated affordability disrupts the market dynamics and discourages private investment. They claim that market-based solutions encourage housing diversity and innovation. However, this perspective often overlooks the social consequences of housing inequality. Advocates, including the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission and Focus Ireland, strongly support treating housing as a human right. They argue that stable housing improves individual well-being and social equity. When people have secure housing, they are healthier, more productive, and better able to contribute to society. This approach prioritizes public welfare over profit. Recognizing housing as a right also has practical benefits. Stable housing reduces healthcare costs, as people living in secure environments experience fewer stress-related illnesses. It also improves educational outcomes, especially for children who thrive in consistent living conditions. These benefits extend beyond individuals, strengthening communities and reducing societal costs in the long term. One successful international example is Finland's Housing First initiative. Implemented in 2008, this program prioritizes providing immediate, unconditional housing for homeless individuals. Tailored support services are offered to help them maintain their homes. Since its introduction, Finland has significantly reduced homelessness, with housing retention rates of around 80%. This demonstrates the effectiveness of treating housing as a human right, offering a model for Ireland to consider. Now, based on the information gathered and presented, let's talk about some discussion questions. Let's start with the first question. Should housing be recognized as a human right? I believe the answer is yes. Housing is fundamental to health, education, and employment. Without stable shelter, individuals cannot fully participate in society and improve their living conditions. Recognizing housing as a human right would ensure that governments prioritize policies guaranteeing access for all, particularly for marginalized groups like single parents or immigrants. That said, critics might argue that defining housing as a human right could lead to overregulation and discourage private investment. However, examples like Finland's Housing First initiative show us that treating housing as a right doesn't have to come at the expense of a stable economy. It can actually result in long-term societal benefits. Now, addressing the second question, what role should governments play in ensuring affordable housing? I think that governments need to play a central role here. They can invest in public housing projects, implement rent control policies, and provide subsidies to low-income families. For example, public investment is critical to counteracting the private market's failure to meet the needs of lower-income populations. Also, government should regulate the real estate market to prevent excessive rent increases and speculative practices that contribute to housing instability. Partnerships with the private sector can also be effective. Offering tax breaks or subsidies to developers who include affordable units in their projects is one way to balance public and private interests. Finally, let's take a look at the third question. How can we balance private sector involvement with public housing needs? This balance can be achieved by incentivizing private developers to contribute to affordable housing. For instance, governments could require a certain percentage of new housing developments to include affordable units, offering tax breaks or subsidies in return. A mixed model is another solution, where governments provide funding for infrastructure while the private sector focuses on development. Clear regulations are key here. They ensure accountability while still allowing companies to operate profitably. This way, the private sector remains engaged in housing development, but public needs are not overlooked. In conclusion, Ireland's housing crisis highlights the failures of market-driven solutions and the urgent need for systemic reform. Privatization has prioritized profits over people, while government initiatives have fallen short of addressing long-term needs. Reframing housing as a human right is both an ethical and practical solution. By adopting inclusive and sustainable policies, Ireland can ensure that everyone has a place to call home. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the sources that inform this presentation. These include reports from BBC News, Focus Ireland, and the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, among others. Each of these sources provides valuable insights into Ireland's housing crisis and potential solutions. Thank you all for your time and attention.